Last year, you participated in a panel discussion with Telstra Ventures at the Telecom Council event, TC3, and Mark Sherman from Telstra said that existing telco billing systems were obsolete and frankly would be replaced globally over the next 5 years. I can talk a little bit about that from a personal standpoint. We moved our account to a business level account with a tier 1 carrier. And I will tell you that going from a consumer family plan type billing experience to their enterprise billing experience was just terrible. It was amazing to me. The user interfaces, the lack of real-time data just simply wasn't there. So my question for you is, why haven't carriers moved more aggressively with real-time, user-friendly enterprise billing experiences?
Well, I think to some extent it's been a hidden problem out in the wider world. I think we've seen real-time being evolved into something that was once only for prepaid customers, now into the consumer market, into the postpaid customer market. And most carriers globally would agree that they either need to or are already giving their consumers a real-time experience. A lot of that's driven by the visibility of that in the media and through the regulators. And frankly, the consumer side is what got most of the attention of the regulators and what you see in the press. And so that was the hot button to fix first. I would argue that in a lot of postpaid markets, in a lot of markets, the enterprise, the problems that are created by not having a real-time experience for enterprise are actually larger and more impactful from a revenue perspective than the consumer side is. They just didn't get the attention globally, nor it's also a more difficult problem to solve versus the consumer problem. It's much more complex to serve enterprise customers in real time than it is to serve the end consumer in real time. So it's a harder problem to solve, and it wasn't getting the attention. So I think now, as some of the carriers are seeing the benefits they're getting from treating postpaid consumers in real time, that then they're starting to look as the next phase, how do we really do this for the enterprise customer?
Jennifer, you mentioned the word complexity. What are some of the specific technical challenges that carriers face moving from a traditional billing platform to becoming a digital service provider?
So specifically within the enterprise market, it has to do with the complexity of the account structures, the volume, the sheer sort of volume of the number of devices that you're managing that all have a relationship to each other, and also the complexity of the types of deals that they do with enterprises. So if you think about a consumer family plan, you're only managing 3 to 10 devices on an account. If you look at a large enterprise, you're potentially managing thousands or tens of thousands of end devices. If you have structured a complex agreement where there's a certain pricing model in place until you hit a minimum commitment, and then pricing changes or discounting kicks in, and you want to try to give the enterprise the ability to manage their budgets, that means that you have to have a view of every single device, all thousands of devices, how they basically roll up through the hierarchy to have met or not have met that minimum commitment, to know exactly when that discounting kicks in. Otherwise, you can't give the enterprise a real-time view. So it's the complexity of the devices and the plans. And then also, if you think about something like pooling resources, where with a family plan, you're sharing a pool of data with maybe 5 devices. With an enterprise, you've got potentially 5,000 devices trying to pull off that same balance at the same time. And that is a very big technical problem for any type of database technology to solve, or any type of billing technology to solve. So being able to manage that accurately and manage that in real time is, that's what our technology was built to do. And so that's a problem that just traditional systems weren't even thinking about when they were designed.
Yeah, well, let's assume they get through all those complexities. One of the terms we've been hearing in the industry is this whole customer experience. So that makes me think about service level agreements. At what point do you think you'll start to see service level agreements that are common in a wholesale carrier agreement start being layered into enterprise billing agreements?
I think it's definitely gonna be driven by the types and number of devices that start connecting. I think in a straight up mobile space, you've got a big trend around bringing your own device. So you're not going to see service level agreements develop there. But once you have a lot more devices generating a lot more traffic that aren't necessarily, classic phones or things like that, you're going to see service level agreements arise, because the reality is there's going to be a ton of traffic. Some of it's going to be much more important than others. Some of it's going to need, to be prioritized, and then you're going to see service level agreements come through for devices that are handling things that are mission critical versus devices that are just tracking something that can be, looked at a later date.
Well, you mentioned, I think, the right point, which is around policy and prioritization. So the article you wrote talked about bespoke customer agreements with policy capabilities included in these agreements. How do the next generation real-time billing companies like MATRIXX adapt to these rapid changes in new IP-based policy-driven agreements?
Yeah, I think it has to do with coming at the market at a later time and architecting products that are flexible and that have, sort of a non-traditional view of what a business model might be. And if you think about what MATRIXX brought to market, it can function as like a traditional rating or policy engine would function, but it's not actually developed that way. It's developed as a decision engine. And that the decision, it looks at however many variable types of parameters you have and whatever the way you want to put them together to make a decision, and then it can help you make that decision, whether that decision is financial, non-financial, or any type of policy. It's about the technology to make the decision versus classic policy or classic rating. And so it's maintaining that flexibility that helps us meet our different customer needs as they evolve their business models.
I think you brought up a great point. Starting later in the game, or at least in a more contemporary time, post 2000, where at least the wireline businesses had moved to an IP-based type world, and they had become ISPs. And the early ISPs, I think, were the real early adopters, where they had to write their own scripts. They had to capture data in real time off of modem pools. And so when I talk about my personal experience going over to the enterprise billing platform of a tier 1 carrier, it looked like a circa 1990 mainframe billing system that was, it was a dinosaur. So take us back to when you started MATRIXX. You're one of the co-founders. What time frame did you start the company, and what architectures were available to you that allows you to be a next generation billing company?
So we started the company in 2008, and it really was just seeing this first wave of smart devices coming out and realizing that people were going to start accessing the internet in a whole different way through their mobile devices. And there wasn't any technologies out there that were built to handle that. And that's why we ended up starting the company from scratch and the technology from scratch, because there were commercial and memory database technologies out there, but they fundamentally weren't any different, and hadn't made any major changes to the basic transaction processing model in a decade. And so we had to start from scratch, really, and build the underlying technology first before we then built the applications on top of it. So the entire stack ends up being MATRIXX developed and MATRIXX intellectual property, because there really wasn't anything available. Again, it's a mix of complexity and scalability together that we saw the market driving towards, and there would be a need to handle a whole different level of people using the internet, through various devices, and devices using the internet, and people wanting to monetize that in ways that they didn't know how they were necessarily going to monetize it, and they still don't in a lot of verticals. And so as those models develop, you have to have something that's also, again, flexible from a decision-making perspective, so that it can evolve as these different industry verticals evolve in the mobile space.